Why did the room fall silent the moment she stepped inside? No one announced her, no one stood, no one even looked twice. The mess hall hummed with fluorescent light and casual arrogance. Metal trays scraped. Laughter burst loud and sharp, then died just as quickly. 37 Marines filled the space with the confidence of men who believed the world had already proven they belonged. She moved through them like a shadow that hadn't been noticed yet. Her boots didn't scuff. Her posture didn't ask permission. She carried herself the way people do when they've stopped needing approval a long time ago. Her hair was tied back tight, regulation perfect. Her uniform was Navy issue, but bare. No name, no rank, no patches, just fabric and discipline. She took her tray, nodded once to the kitchen staff, and chose a table no one else wanted. Back to the wall, clear sightlines, all exits visible. Old habits. She sat alone. Across the room, laughter spiked again. A cluster of Marines occupied the central table like royalty. Loud, relaxed, dominant. The kind of men who had survived war and decided survival meant superiority. Staff Sergeant Marcus Kine leaned back in his chair, boots stretched forward, arms folded across his chest. He had the build of a recruiting poster and the confidence of a man who'd never been corrected hard enough to remember it. "This place is getting soft," he said, voice carrying. "Budget cuts, new rules, sensitivity briefings," he snorted. "Combat doesn't care about feelings." The men around him laughed. She heard every word. She always did. Her fork paused midair, not because of anger, not even resentment. Recognition. She'd heard this tone before, in briefing rooms that smelled like burned coffee and denial, in after-action reports that rewrote chaos into competence, in apologies that arrived after the funerals. She ate slowly, mechanically. 6 months earlier in Mogadishu, she'd eaten just like this. Fuel, not food. The door had blown inward at 2:03 hours. Intel said one target, minimal resistance, a clean grab. Intel had been wrong. 12 hostiles, tunnel systems not on the map, heavy weapons hidden behind false walls. 93 seconds of violence. Lieutenant David Ramirez dropped first. Her best friend. The man who'd carried her through Hell Week when hypothermia made the ocean feel like glass. He went down in the doorway, armor failing where confidence had replaced verification. She still remembered the sound he made when he hit the floor. Chief Webb followed, then Chen. 3 bodies, 1 escaped target. And a report that never used the word arrogance. She swallowed and kept eating. Across the room, Corporal Garrett Huxley noticed her. He was big, bigger than most. The kind of size men leaned into when they didn't trust anything else about themselves. His eyes lingered on her longer than necessary, curiosity curdling into something else. "Who's that?" he muttered. Kine followed his gaze, smirked. "Lost," he said, "or stupid." They watched her like predators testing the fence. She didn't look back. That bothered them. Huxley stood. Not abruptly, casually, like a man who expected the world to move when he did. He took a path that didn't make sense, past her table instead of toward the tray return. He stopped close enough that his shadow fell across her notebook. She kept writing. "Excuse me, ma'am." She looked up slowly, met his eyes, calm, assessing. "No," she said, "you haven't." A few heads turned. Huxley smiled thinly and extended his hand. "Corporal Huxley, Force Recon." She glanced at his hand, then back to her notebook. "Busy." The word landed like a slap. The room went quiet in stages. Laughter died, forks paused, phones came out. Huxley's jaw tightened. "This is a Marine facility," he said, voice lowering. "Protocols matter. Maybe you're in the wrong place." She capped her pen. "Do you always touch strangers when you're confused?" she asked mildly. A ripple moved through the mess hall. Huxley reached for her shoulder. He never touched it. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Later, men would argue over the details. Who moved first, how she did it, whether it was luck. They were wrong. She rose smoothly, redirected his wrist, and let physics teach the lesson. Huxley hit the floor hard, shoulder, hip, face. Silence. 37 Marines stared as their enforcer gasped on concrete, his arm useless, his certainty shattered. She stood over him, breathing steady. Personal space, she said. It matters. Staff Sergeant Kine was on his feet now. What the hell do you think you're doing? She turned to him. Defending myself, she said. Your Marine escalated. Kine stepped closer, authority flaring. This is my mess hall. Her expression didn't change. Interesting, she said. I thought it belonged to the United States Marine Corps. Phones were recording now. No one laughed. Huxley staggered upright, rage replacing pain. He lunged again, this time for her hair. That was the mistake. Her elbow drove back. Air left his lungs. His body folded. She controlled his arm, applied pressure with clinical precision. You're hurting me, he wheezed. No, she said quietly. I'm educating you. She released him. He collapsed into a chair, pale and shaking. Kine pointed at her. You're done. MPs are coming. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. Opened it. Held it where everyone could see. Commander Alina Hayes. SEAL Team 5. The room didn't breathe. Kine's face drained of color. For the last 43 minutes, she said, you've been evaluated. She scanned the room. The phones disappeared. Assessment isn't over, she added, but your assumptions are. She gathered her tray. Tomorrow, she said softly, we see who you really are. She walked out alone. And for the first time that night, no one followed. What do you do when the person you underestimated walks away with your future in her pocket? The door closed behind her with a soft, almost polite click. No slam, no drama, just absence. And somehow that was worse. For several seconds, no one in the mess hall moved. 37 Marines sat frozen in the wreckage of their own certainty, surrounded by half-eaten food and the echo of a truth they hadn't wanted to hear. Staff Sergeant Marcus Kine finally exhaled. It came out shaky. He looked around at his men he'd led through deployments, men who trusted him, men whose loyalty had been forged in dust and blood, and saw something he hadn't seen in years. Fear. Not of punishment, not even of career consequences. Fear of being exposed. She's bluffing, someone muttered, too quietly to be convincing. Kine wanted to believe it, he needed to. But deep down, he knew better. You didn't fake that kind of calm. You didn't fake eyes like that. You didn't fake the way she dismantled Huxley without raising her voice. And you didn't flash credentials like those, unless you were prepared to burn everything down. Phones away, now, Kine barked. Chairs scraped as Marines snapped back into discipline, too late to matter. The mess hall emptied fast after that. No jokes, no swagger, just boots and silence. Huxley lingered. His arm throbbed, not just pain, something worse. Humiliation. He flexed his fingers, testing movement, adding that it hurt, adding more that it reminded him. She hadn't even looked tired. You okay? Brennan asked, trying to sound casual. Huxley didn't answer. Across the base, Alina Hayes walked alone beneath sodium lights that cast long shadows across concrete. The night air was cool, carrying the distant scent of the ocean. She welcomed it, let it wash over her. She hadn't planned to escalate things that far, not physically. But plans change when ego reaches for you. She replayed the moment in her mind, not with satisfaction, not with anger, with analysis. The grab, the hesitation, the choice. He'd had options. So had she. She reached her quarters, keyed in, and shut the door behind her. Only then did she allow her shoulders to drop a fraction of an inch. Just a fraction. Inside, the room was sparse. Government-issue furniture, a narrow bed, a desk, no personal photos, no souvenirs. Except one. A folded flag sat on the desk, encased in glass. She didn't touch it. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, letting the silence settle. Her pulse slowed, her breathing evened. Then the memories came anyway. Ramirez's laugh, Webb's voice on comms, Chen's habit of humming when she cleaned her rifle. She closed her eyes. "You didn't save them," a familiar voice whispered. She ignored it, she always did. At 4:30, Alina was already dressed. Combat gear, practical, worn but immaculate, every strap adjusted for function, not appearance, every piece placed with intention. She moved like someone who'd learned the cost of mistakes early. By the time the eastern horizon began to pale, she was gone. The parade ground buzzed with controlled anxiety. Marines stood in formation, sharper than they'd been the night before. Cleaner, quieter. Trying. Kine paced in front of them, eyes bloodshot. He hadn't slept. None of them had. Vehicles rolled in. Colonel Bradford, Major Vance, then the third vehicle. Silence fell. Alina stepped out of the Humvee like she belonged to the morning, like the base had been built around her arrival. She didn't look at Kine at first. She didn't need to. 15 minutes, she said. Plan. No insults, no lectures. That was the mercy. They huddled over maps, voices low and urgent. This time no jokes, no bravado, just tactics. "She's one person," someone said. Kine shook his head. "She's not." They deployed. And then she disappeared. Not dramatically, not with flair. Just gone. No heat signature, no movement, no sound. Minutes stretched. Reports came in. Nothing, false positives, empty buildings, a casing, a mirror, rearranged equipment. Each message tightened the knot in Kine's chest. She was inside their heads now. Brennan's comms went dead. Then Huxley's. Then everyone. Her voice cut through the static like a blade. "This is your target," she said calmly. "You're predictable." The realization hit Kine hard. They weren't hunting her. She was hunting them. He ordered convergence on high ground, the textbook move, the safe move. The wrong move. She'd known it would be. From a ridge overlooking the grid, Alina watched them move into position. 37 shapes clustering like comfort could save them. She exhaled slowly. This wasn't about humiliation. It never was. It was about consequences. She triggered the final phase. Sim rounds cracked, smoke bloomed, confusion erupted. One by one, Marines were tagged out, not violently, efficiently, methodically. A tap on the shoulder, a simulated round to the vest, a whispered word behind an ear. Dead. By the end, only Kine remained. He stood alone, weapon lowered, chest heaving. She stepped out from cover. He didn't raise his rifle. "I failed," he said quietly. She studied him, not with contempt, with assessment. "Yes," she agreed, "you did." They stood there in the cooling morning. "But," she added after a beat, "failure isn't final unless you decide it is." He looked up, surprised. She held his gaze. "You built a culture that rewarded noise over awareness, strength over restraint, certainty over curiosity," she said. "That culture killed people." His jaw tightened. "Can you dismantle it?" she asked. "Or are you too attached to being right?" Kine swallowed. "I don't know," he admitted. That mattered. She nodded once. "Good," she said. "That's where learning starts." The exercise ended. The report would be written later, carefully, honestly. As the sun rose higher, Alina walked back toward her vehicle. The base felt different now, quieter, watching. She paused once, glancing back at the Marines regrouping behind her. Men standing a little straighter, thinking a little harder. Not redeemed, but awake. She climbed into the Humvee. As it pulled away, she allowed herself one small, private thought. David would have liked this. Then she faced forward again. Because dignity doesn't announce itself. It simply acts. Why did the silence after the exercise feel heavier than the noise before it? By 7:30, the base had returned to its routines. Trucks moved, radios crackled, boots hit pavement in familiar rhythms. On the surface, nothing had changed. But beneath it, something had cracked. Bravo Company gathered in a closed briefing room, doors sealed, windows shaded. No phones, no observers, just them, and the weight of what they'd learned about themselves. Alina stood at the front, helmet off now, hair still tight, expression unreadable. She hadn't slept much. It showed only if you knew what to look for. The faint tightness around her eyes, the way she shifted her weight when she thought no one noticed. She placed her notebook on the table. It landed softly, final. "Sit," she said. They did. Kine chose a chair near the front, not the center. That mattered. Huxley sat stiffly, arms strapped, eyes forward. Brennan stared at the tabletop like it might open and swallow him. Thornton sat rigid, fighting the instinct to disappear. Alina didn't speak right away. She let the quiet do its work. "Before I say anything else," she began, "I need to know something." Her eyes moved around the room. "Does anyone here believe this was about proving I'm better than you?" No one answered. She waited. Thornton cleared his throat. "No, ma'am." "Good," Alina said. "Because if that's what you took from this, then we've all wasted our time." She leaned back against the table, arms loose at her sides. "What happened last night didn't start with a fight," she continued. "It started with certainty, with the belief that you already knew everything you needed to know." Her gaze paused on Huxley, not accusatory, just precise. "That belief is comfortable," she said. "It tells you you're safe, that you've earned your place, that the world makes sense." She tapped the notebook once. "In combat, that belief gets people killed." The room stayed still. She flipped the notebook open. "6 months ago," she said quietly, "I led a team into a compound in Mogadishu. We trusted Marine intel. We trusted confidence dressed up as experience." Kine's jaw tightened. "We were wrong." Her voice didn't shake. That was the frightening part. "Lieutenant Ramirez died in the doorway," she said. "Chief Webb bled out before the medevac arrived. Petty Officer Chen never hit the ground alive." She looked up. "I didn't come here for revenge," Alina said. "I came because if I didn't, their deaths would stay buried under acronyms and classification stamps. And because I saw the same habits here that killed them there." The words settled like dust after an explosion. Brennan swallowed. "Ma'am, we didn't know." "I know," Alina said. "That's the problem." She closed the notebook. "You want to be elite?" she asked. "Then curiosity matters more than pride. Verification matters more than bravado. And respect, real respect, has nothing to do with fear." Her eyes met Kine. "Leadership isn't about control," she said. "It's about responsibility." Kine nodded slowly. "I lost sight of that." "Yes," she said simply. He didn't flinch. That mattered too. The meeting ended without ceremony. No speeches, no redemption arcs. Just work. Over the next days, Alina embedded with the unit, not as a commander, as an observer, a presence. She joined briefings, ate in the mess hall again, this time not alone. She asked questions that made people uncomfortable, not accusatory questions. Worse. "Why? Why do you trust this source? Why didn't you challenge that assumption? Why does that make sense to you? She listened more than she spoke. And slowly, reluctantly, Bravo Company began to change. Not because they wanted to impress her. Because they didn't want to fail like that again. Huxley avoided her at first. Then one afternoon he didn't. She was cleaning her weapon in the armory when he approached, moving carefully, like a man walking toward a line he wasn't sure he was allowed to cross. "Commander," he said. She didn't look up. "Corporal." He stood there, uncomfortable, stripped of his usual confidence. "I was wrong," he said finally. She paused, looked at him. "Yes," she agreed. He winced, then nodded. "I wanted to say it anyway." She studied him for a moment longer, then returned to her work. "Don't apologize to me," she said. "Fix what made you think you were right." He swallowed. "I'm trying." "I can see that," she said. That was all. Later that night, Elena stood alone near the perimeter fence, watching the ocean swallow the sun. The sky burned orange and purple, then faded. She pressed her thumb against the edge of the folded flag in her quarters earlier. Had almost opened it. Hadn't. Progress didn't erase ghosts. They walked beside you, quiet, persistent. Kind joined her after a while, keeping his distance. "You're not staying," he said. "No," she replied. "Report already written." "Drafted," she said. "Final depends on what happens next." He nodded. "Fair." He hesitated. "Why us?" She didn't answer right away. "Because you mattered," she said finally, "and because you reminded me of someone I used to be." He glanced at her, surprised. She didn't elaborate. The next morning, Elena briefed the command staff. The tone was measured, professional, honest. Bravo Company would not be disbanded, but it would be watched. The recommendation carried weight. As she packed her gear, a knock came at her door. Thornton stood there, nervous. "Ma'am," he said, "I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" she asked. "For not writing us off," he said, "for letting us learn." She considered him, young, earnest, still malleable. "Remember this feeling," she said. "The discomfort, the doubt, that's where growth lives." "Yes, ma'am." When the transport rolled out, Elena watched the base recede through the window. Another mission completed, another scar added. Her radio crackled. "Commander Hayes," a voice said, "new tasking when you're ready." She closed her eyes briefly. "Send it," she replied. The world didn't pause for reflection. But somewhere behind her, 37 Marines would never forget the night certainty failed them. And somewhere deeper still, Elena carried her ghosts forward, not as weights but as reminders. Sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't announce itself at all. Sometimes it simply stays long enough to teach and leaves before it's thanked. What happens after the lesson ends, but the memory does. The aircraft lifted smoothly off the tarmac, its vibration settling into Elena Hayes' bones like a familiar ache. She sat alone near the rear, helmet resting beside her boots, hands folded loosely in her lap. Outside the window, Camp Pendleton shrank into geometry, lines, grids, order. She didn't watch it disappear. She learned long ago that goodbyes were a luxury missions didn't afford. The hum of the engines carried her back to places she didn't invite, places that arrived anyway. For the first 20 minutes, she reviewed the report on her tablet. Dry language, measured phrasing, institutional restraint, words that tried to compress human failure into bullet points and recommendations. She hated that part. She closed the file. Across from her, reflected faintly in the glass, her own eyes stared back, green, steady, older than they had any right to be. She thought of Huxley's face when he'd said I was wrong, the way it hadn't been easy, the way it had cost him something. Those moments mattered. They were rare, fragile. But they didn't erase the past. The aircraft banked east. Somalia came unbidden. Night heat, the smell of cordite and dust. Ramirez's voice over comms, too calm in hindsight. The moment when instinct screamed something was off and doctrine insisted otherwise. She trusted the system. She wouldn't make that mistake again. The flight landed at an airstrip she didn't recognize. That was normal. Names changed. Geography blurred. The work stayed the same. A man in civilian clothes met her at the base of the ramp. Early 40s. No insignia. No wasted movement. "Commander Hayes," he said, "I'm Collins." She nodded. "Brief me." They walked. "Eastern Corridor," he said. "Urban adjacent, partner force involved. Intelligence is conflicted." Elena almost smiled. "Of course it is." They reached a low building with reinforced windows. Inside, maps covered the walls. Satellite imagery. Grainy photos of streets that looked like every other street she'd ever seen. "Target is a facilitator," Collins continued. "Moves funds, coordinates logistics, not flashy." "Then why am I here?" Elena asked. He hesitated. "Because the partner force has requested oversight," he said carefully, "and because you don't trust second-hand certainty." She studied the map. "Who's the partner force?" "Marines," Collins said. "New unit, recently restructured." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "From Pendleton." "Yes." She exhaled slowly. The irony tasted bitter. She was briefed with the team that night. Younger Marines, different faces, same confidence tempered by something new. Awareness. They looked at her differently, not with challenge, with attention. That mattered too. During planning, a junior Marine flagged a discrepancy in the intel timeline. Nothing dramatic, just a question. Elena leaned forward. "Say it again." He did. They cross-checked. The target's movement window shifted by 12 minutes. 12 minutes that would have put them in a kill zone. Elena felt a familiar chill. "Good catch," she said. The Marine blinked. "Ma'am." "You just saved lives," she said. "Remember how that felt." The mission launched at dawn. No explosions, no heroics. They moved quietly, adjusted when things didn't match the plan, pulled back when a door felt wrong, waited when instinct said rush. They captured the facilitator without firing a shot. As they exfiltrated, Elena watched the Marines move, communicating, checking each other, questioning assumptions. Not perfect, but learning. Back at the FOB, she sat alone on a crate, helmet off, sweat cooling on her neck. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind the familiar hollowness. Success didn't fill it. It never had. Collins approached, commands pleased. Elena shrugged. "They usually are." He studied her. "You could have stayed at Pendleton, written the report, let someone else take this." "Yes," she said. "Why didn't you?" She looked out over the wire, where the desert stretched into nowhere. "Because change doesn't stick if it's only theoretical," she said, "and because someone has to stand between certainty and consequence." He nodded slowly. That night, Elena finally opened the flag. She unfolded it with careful hands, the creases sharp, the stars painfully bright. Ramirez's funeral had been small, classified, no cameras, just quiet grief and folded cloth. She traced the edge of the fabric with her thumb. "I tried," she whispered. There was no answer. Only the soft snap of fabric settling back into its case. Days blurred, missions overlapped, names changed, the work continued. Elena moved through it all with the same controlled precision she always had, but something had shifted. She noticed it when she corrected herself mid-assumption. When she asked questions she already thought she knew the answer to. When she listened longer than necessary. The lesson hadn't just been for Bravo Company. Weeks later, she received a message. From Kine. Short, formal. We changed the training cycle, added red team reviews, lost some people, kept the right ones, thank you. She stared at the words longer than she needed to. Then she deleted the message. Not out of coldness, out of understanding. The work wasn't about gratitude. It was about continuity. On her next assignment, the stakes were higher: political pressure, compressed timeline, intel that came with footnotes and caveats. She pushed back. Hard. She delayed launch by 6 hours, reran the analysis, verified sources. Command wasn't happy, but they complied. At hour 5, new imagery came in. Ambush. She closed her eyes for a moment, longer than usual. When the mission went live, it went clean. Lives preserved by patience. That night, Alina sat on a rooftop overlooking a city that didn't know her name. Lights flickered. Music drifted faintly from somewhere below. She allowed herself a rare thing. Pride. Not in herself. In the process. In the quiet victories no one would ever celebrate. Her radio chirped. Commander, a young voice said, just wanted to confirm you were right about the access point. Alina smiled faintly. Good, she said. Now forget I said anything and remember why you checked. She signed off. The stars overhead were sharp and cold. She lay back against the concrete, hands behind her head, and stared up at them. She thought of Ramirez, of Webb, of Chen, of 37 Marines learning to listen, of a young corporal asking why. The world would keep producing confident men, loud systems, clean reports. It always had. But somewhere in the spaces between, quieter forces were at work. People willing to pause, to question, to carry the weight of knowing they could be wrong. Alina closed her eyes. Tomorrow would come, it always did. And when it did, she would meet it the same way she always had. Not with noise, not with ego, but with attention. Because sometimes the bravest thing a leader can do is slow down. And sometimes dignity doesn't need to be announced. It just keeps choosing better, one decision at a time. Why did the warning come from the one voice no one had bothered to listen to? The message arrived at 2:17, encrypted, flagged urgent, but not loud. The kind of alert that didn't scream until it was already too late. Alina was awake when it came in. She usually was. She lay on a narrow cot in a safe house that smelled faintly of bleach and old smoke, one boot still on, the other discarded near the wall. Sleep came in fragments now. 15 minutes here, 10 there, enough to keep the edge sharp, never enough to dull it. She read the message once. Then again. Then she sat up. The mission wasn't hers, not officially. A joint operation greenlit by command already in motion, wheels turning, timelines locked, confidence high. Too high. She keyed her radio, patch me to Collins. Static, then his voice groggy. It's 2 in the morning. I know, she said. Pull the feed from Sector Delta. The thermal pass from 40 minutes ago. A pause typing, silence stretching. Okay, Collins said slowly. I see it. What do you see? Alina asked. Movement, he replied, but Intel tagged it as non-hostile. Alina swung her legs off the cot. That's not non-hostile spacing, she said. That's Overwatch. Another pause, longer this time. Damn it, Collins muttered. She stood, already reaching for her gear. Who's on the ground? He named the unit. Her jaw tightened. Bravo adjacent, new leadership still learning. How long until contact? She asked. 25 minutes, Collins said, maybe less. She didn't hesitate. Delay the push. They're already staged, he said. Command signed off. Then unsign it, Alina snapped, or you'll be signing condolence letters by morning. Silence. She waited. Finally Collins exhaled. I'll try. She cut the channel and moved fast. Armor on, weapon checked, comms synced, no theatrics, no rush. Outside, the city slept in uneven rhythms. Somewhere, a generator hummed. Somewhere else, a dog barked once and went quiet. Elena mounted the vehicle, just as Collins came back on the line. Launch delayed, he said, barely. Good, she replied. Now reroute the drones. I want eyes where the plan says there shouldn't be any. They found it 3 minutes later. A secondary team, dug in, patient, waiting for the predictable approach. An ambush written in negative space. Elena closed her eyes briefly. Too close. She pushed the feed to the ground team herself. This is Commander Hayes, she said into the mic. You're being watched from the East Ridge. Pull back, now. There was a beat of silence. Then a voice, young, tight. With respect, ma'am, our intel is wrong, Elena said flatly. And if you advance, you die. Another pause. She could hear breathing on the other end. Rapid, adrenaline rising. Confirm, the voice said. She hated that word. Confirm by looking left, Elena said. 2 heat signatures 30 meters up. They're not civilians. The channel stayed open. Then, holy. Gunfire cracked in the distance. Not close. A test, a message. Elena's hand curled into a fist. Fall back, she ordered. Smoke and reposition. This time they listened. The firefight that followed was short, controlled, messy in the way real fights always were. No music, no slow motion. But no body bags either. When it was over, Elena sat on the hood of the vehicle, heart pounding harder than she liked to admit. That had almost gone very wrong. Again. Collins joined her, rubbing his face. You weren't assigned to that op. I know, she said. You overrode command. Yes. He studied her. That's going to come back on you. She looked at him. Does that bother you? He shook his head. No, but it should bother you. It does, she said quietly, every time. Word traveled fast after that, not officially, not in reports, but in looks, in pauses during briefings, in the way junior operators started double-checking assumptions before voicing them, in the way senior one stopped pretending certainty was the same thing as competence. Elena felt it everywhere. The weight of being the person who says wait when everyone else wants go. That night she sat alone again, the folded flag resting beside her this time, not unopened, just present. She thought about how close she'd come to losing another team to the same pattern. She thought about Kine, about Huxley, about the look on Brennan's face when doubt had finally outweighed pride. She wondered how many times she could keep stepping into the gap before it closed on her instead. The answer came sooner than expected. 3 days later, she was called in. Command room, polished table, clean uniforms, smiles that didn't reach eyes. Commander Hayes, the general said, folding his hands, you're becoming difficult. Elena met his gaze. I'm becoming effective. A few chairs shifted. You delayed a sanctioned mission, he continued, again. And prevented an ambush, she replied, again. That's not how this system works, he said. She leaned forward slightly. Then the system needs to work better. Silence. You're not wrong, the general said finally, but you're disruptive. She almost laughed. Instead, she said, so was every correction that saved lives. Another pause. He sighed. You've been carrying this alone for a long time, haven't you? The question caught her off guard. Too long, he added gently. She didn't answer. Take leave, he said. Mandatory 2 weeks. Her eyes narrowed. This isn't concern, it's containment. Maybe, he admitted, or maybe it's survival, yours. She considered arguing. Didn't. 2 weeks later, Alina stood on a quiet stretch of coastline she hadn't seen since childhood. Wind off the water, gray sky, endless horizon. No radio, no weapon, just boots in sand. The silence was different here, not tactical, not waiting. She breathed. Memories surfaced, not just the bad ones. Her father teaching her to swim, her first solo flight, the moment she'd passed selection and realized strength could be quiet. She sat on a driftwood log and watched the waves break. For the first time in years, she didn't feel responsible for what might happen next. It scared her, and it healed her. When her leave ended, she returned leaner, quieter, more certain of what mattered. There was a message waiting. From a junior Marine she barely remembered. "Ma'am, I questioned the plan today. We adjusted. No contact. Thank you for teaching us how to pause." Alina stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she powered the device down. The lesson was spreading. Not fast. Not loudly. But steadily. And Alina understood something then. Something that softened the ache she carried without ever removing it. She wasn't meant to fix the system. She was meant to infect it. With doubt. With patience. With the courage to say, "I don't know," and check anyway. The ocean rolled in, indifferent and endless. She stood, brushed sand from her hands, and turned back toward the road. There was still work to do. And this time, she wouldn't be the only one listening. What does redemption look like when no one is watching anymore? The call came without urgency. No flashing priority tags, no countdown, just coordinates, a window, and a quiet note at the bottom of the brief. Advisory presence requested. Alina read it twice. That phrase used to bother her. It felt like a demotion dressed up as diplomacy. A way of saying, "We want your judgment, but not your authority." Now she understood its value. She arrived at the forward base just before dusk. The air was cooler here, thinner. Mountains loomed like unfinished thoughts, their edges blurred by dust and distance. The Marines waiting for her didn't snap to attention. They didn't posture. They nodded. Respect earned softly lasts longer. The unit was mixed, experience scattered unevenly. Some fresh faces. Some eyes that had already learned what loss tasted like. Their commander, Captain Lewis, met her near the map board. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You asked," Alina replied. "That matters." They briefed her, not hurried, not defensive. When gaps appeared, no one rushed to fill them with confidence. They left them open, honest. That was new. The mission itself was simple in description and complex in reality. A village caught between factions. An informant whose value depended entirely on timing and trust. Too early and he'd panic. Too late and he'd disappear, or worse. Alina listened. She didn't take the lead. She asked questions. What assumptions are we making? Which ones feel comfortable? What would make this fall apart quietly? The room leaned into the discomfort. Marines shifted, thought, spoke. At one point, a corporal hesitated before raising his hand. "Ma'am," he said, "this route it's fast, but it feels exposed." Alina met his eyes. "Why?" He swallowed. "Because it's obvious." She nodded. "Good, what's the alternative?" They found it together. That night Alina walked the perimeter alone. No weapon, no escort, just boots crunching softly on gravel. She thought about how different this felt from years ago, when she'd carried authority like armor, believing leadership meant knowing the answers. Now she understood. Leadership meant making space for the right questions. The mission launched before sunrise. No speeches, no rituals. Just quiet preparation and shared glances that said, "I see you." They moved slower than the plan demanded, paused when something felt off, adjusted without ego. The informant emerged exactly where uncertainty said he would, not where confidence had predicted. They exfiltrated without contact. Clean. Back at base, relief spread slowly, not celebratory, thoughtful. Captain Lewis approached Alina later, hands in his pockets. "I used to think decisiveness meant speed," he said. "Now I think it means restraint." She smiled faintly. "It means responsibility." That night Alina sat alone again, but this time the solitude felt chosen. She opened her notebook, not the official one, the private one she rarely used anymore. She wrote 3 names: David Ramirez, Chief Webb, Petty Officer Chen. Below them, she wrote a sentence she hadn't allowed herself before. "Your lessons survived." The radio crackled softly beside her. "Commander," a familiar voice said, "Kine." She hadn't heard from him in months. "Yes," she replied. "We had an evaluation today," he said. "External, unannounced." She waited. "They said our biggest strength was internal challenge," he continued. "They said it made us slower on paper, safer in reality." She closed her eyes. "Good," she said. There was a pause. "I wanted you to know," Kine added, "that we teach what you showed us now. We don't use your name, but your fingerprints are everywhere." Alina swallowed. "That's how it should be," she said. When the channel went quiet, she didn't feel pride. She felt peace. Weeks later, Alina submitted her final report. Not a resignation. A transition. She would remain operational but no longer embedded. Her role would shift toward mentorship, oversight, and doctrine review, less visible, more foundational. Some would call it stepping back. She knew better. On her last day in the field for a while, she returned to the mess hall where it had all begun. Different faces now, different noise. But the same tables, the same walls. She sat where she had the first time. Alone. A young Marine hesitated nearby, then approached. "Ma'am," she said, voice steady but nervous, "is it okay if I sit?" Alina looked up. "Yes," she said. They ate in companionable silence for a few moments. "I heard a story," the Marine said finally, "about a commander who didn't look like what people expected." Alina smiled slightly. "Stories change." "But the lesson stayed," the Marine said. "They say dignity doesn't need permission." Alina met her eyes. "No," she said softly, "it doesn't." When she left the base that final time, the gate didn't close behind her with finality. It simply opened. The road stretched ahead, uncertain and unmarked. She drove with the window down, letting the wind carry the weight she no longer needed to hold alone. The world would keep testing people. Systems would keep rewarding noise. Confidence would always try to outrun care. But somewhere in briefing rooms and quiet pauses, in the space between instinct and action, her influence would remain. Not as a legend, as a habit. Alina Hayes never needed recognition. She needed continuity. And she had earned it, not by demanding respect but by modeling it. Not by being louder but by being precise. Not by insisting she was right but by making room to be wrong. Because sometimes strength doesn't shout. Sometimes leadership doesn't command. Sometimes dignity doesn't even speak. It simply acts and leaves the world just a little harder to break.